One of the greatest unsolved mysteries in the history of human existence is what happens when we die. Unfortunately, we may never truly get an answer to the age-old question, but the closest thing we have to understanding what happens after we die comes through a phenomenon known as near-death experiences. You've most likely heard the term before, but many people aren't familiar with what actually happens during these experiences. To find out, we talked to a man who has personally survived 5 separate NDEs, and he shared what it feels like to see the other side.
You see, if you wonder why you've never had any bad luck in your life, it's because Murphy lives with me.
According to Scientific American, a near-death experience, or NDE, is triggered during a singular life-threatening episode when the body is injured by a heart attack, shock, or blunt trauma such as an explosion or fall. While researchers still haven't come up with conclusive evidence to show what is actually going on within the brain or body during one of these experiences, most of these events have a shared experience throughout history, cultures, and in different places around the world throughout time. And NDEs are more common than you probably think they are. In a 2001 Dutch study of 344 cardiac patients who had been resuscitated after clinical death, 62 of them, or 18%, reported an NDE. And according to more recent research, 1 in 10 patients who visit a hospital with cardiac arrest experience an NDE. So what happens during one of these experiences? Most people who have an NDE explain it in an eerily similar way. The experiences are so similar, in fact, that even the most skeptical people have to at least admit that there is more at play than just coincidence. Throughout history, explanations have included things like recalling scenes from different moments in your life, feeling a connectedness to everything in the universe, meeting spiritual beings or angels, feeling the presence and love of a god or creator, detaching from your body and floating above it, even flying to different locations, seeing a bright light at the end of a tunnel, and even feeling an extreme sense of peacefulness, including a lack of pain. We spoke to Paul Elder, who is the author of Eyes of an Angel and survivor of not just 1, but 5 separate near-death experiences. He described in detail what it feels like to pass on to the other side, and while each of his experiences differs slightly, they all share many of the common threads just mentioned.
Probably the most surprising was when I was 12 years old. And I drowned and had this amazing experience. Anyway, I fell in the water. And I didn't even have the sense to dog paddle or anything. It was just like instant, oh, I'm screwed, And I went down in the water, and this is about 15 feet deep, this pond. And at some point, I floated to the bottom, and I must have kicked or pushed or something. And so I floated back up to the surface, or just about to the surface, and then headed back down again. Because at some point, all of the air went out and water came in. And it was like very comfortable. And I guess it makes sense, almost, womb-like. And I guess that makes sense because we spend the first 9 months of our life in a liquid environment. And so your lungs don't want for anything when they're full of water. Eventually, you fade into the darkness, you go unconscious because of lack of oxygen in the brain. And at some point, so that happened to me, and I just sort of faded away. And at some point, with a kind of a startle reflex, I became aware again with a little jolt, and I'm still in the water, and I'm aware of that, but everything has changed. And I'm inside, in my mind, like a huge bubble of energy. And inside this bubble that was around me was every color in the rainbow. And I discovered something amazing. Like blue felt different than green, and green felt different than orange and yellow. And I had no idea that you could feel colors, and I was just blown away by it. It was like, wow, I didn't know you could feel colors. And it was so cool. And I never forget standing there in the water, waving my hands through these colors and having the colors permeate my chest and go right through my body. And each color vibrated at a different rate. And it was so cool. And eventually, it probably hit me that, hey, what the heck is going on here? Am I dead? Did I die? Or am I dying? And it was the strangest thing because the only reference I ever had to anything, I didn't know anybody that died. And I'm 12 years old. And the only reference I had was I had read the book Tom Sawyer a few weeks before that. And in the book, Tom Sawyer, Tom is believed to have drowned in the Mississippi. And anyway, he returns home to his church, wherever it is, for the memorial service, looking in the back door and wondering who they're burying, right? Or at least that was in my memory. And I thought of that, and almost instantly, I went shooting out of my body. And in a moment, I'm floating over the choir loft in the back of our Catholic church out in the country, floating. And I'm looking down at the pews, and I'm on the second floor in the choir loft, and I discovered that just by thinking, I could move wherever I wanted to and just floated around. And a couple of times I've moved over the edge, and it was kind of freaky because it's 15 feet down. And I'm thinking about this and think, oh my God, Tom Sawyer didn't fly, I'm flying. And it was so cool. And I'm just floating there thinking, oh God, well, if this is my funeral, where is everybody? There's nobody in the church. But it's Saturday afternoon at like 4 o'clock, And so I'm floating there, wondering what on earth to do next. And all of a sudden, it was like somebody kicked me in the stomach. In an instant, I'm back in my body, and my cousin has me upside down with my face bouncing in the mud, and he's pumping the water out of me.
As you can see, Paul was able to describe the events from when he was 12 years old with extreme lucidity. This isn't a rare occurrence among those who have experienced an NDE. In fact, most people are able to remember their NDEs in even more detail than any event surrounding those moments within their lives. Also, to show you how similar these experiences have been throughout time, here's British Admiral Sir Francis Beaufort in 1791, who wrote about his experience with almost drowning. He said, "A calm feeling of the most perfect tranquility succeeded the most tumultuous sensation, nor was I in any bodily pain. On the contrary, my sensations were now of a rather pleasurable cast." Okay, so different vernacular, but the same sentiment. One of the most cited after effects of NDEs is the washing away of any fear of death at all.
Yeah, it sort of changed how I gained even more so that there's no such thing as dead, so live your life, to the fullest. And so I challenged everything. Given all of the experiences that I've had, what I can say is that I don't think you can have one experience like that without reflecting on who you are, or who's God, what is God, is there a God, and all of those things. But you cannot possibly have that experience without reflecting on that. And I think that what has happened, given all of the experiences that I've had, is I think that we are all individuated aspects of the Creator. There is no other being somewhere that we can pray to on Saturday night to help us win bingo on Sunday. All right? We are, and this sounds like an old New Age hippie thingy, we're all one man, but I think that's exactly what it is. In consciousness, we share the same consciousness as a collective consciousness. And so each of us is an individuated aspect. And I think as a collective consciousness, we are the Creator, right? And the simile that I like to use for that is that imagining that if the oceans of the world were the consciousness of everything, or the Creator, we're the individual drops of water in the ocean. But each of us contains the DNA and the blueprint for the entire ocean. And so essentially, if you want to see God, look in the mirror, look in your eyes, because you're a part of it.
But while most people report having life-changing positive experiences with NDEs, there are also some negative experiences with NDEs that are reportedly filled with trauma, terror, and loneliness. Similarly to having a bad psychedelic trip, there are people who experience a lack of control or fear of being outside their body in a new realm. Some describe being in full isolation, and others describe frightening imagery and animals. But these type of experiences are very rare. Between 1984 and 2001, in the 4 prospective studies conducted involving 130 NDEs, not one distressing experience was reported. However, regardless of the type of experience, scientists have yet to come up with a conclusive explanation for what happens during a near-death experience. One possible explanation brought forth through research is that the brain experiences a lack of oxygen during cardiac arrest, and lack of oxygen can produce hallucinations. This is known as cerebral anoxia. But the problem with this explanation is that people whose brains weren't lacking oxygen have also experienced similar things. A 2010 study published in the Clinical Care Journal suggested another possible explanation. Researchers looked at blood samples from 52 patients shortly after they'd survived cardiac arrest. The 11 patients who reportedly experienced NDEs tended to have significantly higher levels of carbon dioxide in their bloodstreams, and extremely high levels of CO2 can also result in visual hallucinations. There are many mountain climbers who have actually experienced a similar CO2 spike at high altitudes and reported seeing bright lights and hallucinations that sound pretty similar to NDEs. But just like with the oxygen theory, not every patient in the study who had high CO2 levels also had an NDE. From 1990 to 95, Rick Strassman, a professor of psychiatry, studied people who had near-death and mystical experiences following an injection of dimethyltryptamine, otherwise known as DMT. He concluded that the brain produces DMT during an NDE and hypothesized that we produce the molecule in our brain right before we die. Although no one can yet prove this theory, many refer to a study in rats showing that before they die during cardiac arrest, their brain activity spikes and produces higher levels of the DMT molecule. So it is possible. We've all heard the expression, the light at the end of the tunnel, but when people describe an NDE, what do they actually mean by this? Well, there was one scientist who had a theory that during an NDE, you are actually re-experiencing birth, and the light is actually the light of the world that you are remembering for the first time. It's an interesting theory, but there's not necessarily scientific research to back it up. But regardless of what is actually going on and whether or not you believe people are achieving an experience that is beyond this realm, the effects of NDEs on someone's life are without a doubt very real. Besides a fear of death, many people report feeling more empathetic, a lack of attachment to material possessions, and living their life in a more thoughtful way.
It caused me to take a look at my own consciousness. It caused me to appreciate the world in a much different way, that we are more than just physical bodies and that we're connected to everything, literally.
Many people even have spontaneous out-of-body experiences afterwards, or according to Psychology Today, even have a heightened ability for telepathy. But that's for a whole nother video. What do you think happens when we die? What do you think happens during a near-death experience? If you have a personal story about an NDE, comment below and share your story, and I hope we can have a discussion about it in the comment section. Which consciousness-related topic would you like to see covered next on this channel? Thank you for entering the fourth dimension with us. We hope to see you in the next video.
Now it makes more sense because, I mean, who we really are, on the other side, we are conscious vibrating energy, and I've discovered that so many times.